Hello again, folks. So I thought I would have a talk about what I'm beginning to see and think of as something of a crisis in the institutions of British government. It's been going on for a while. I mean, if you follow my Substack or you've been watching some of my more recent videos on here, albeit I don't upload on here as much as I used to, getting prepared for the great censorship curtain. Um, Nevertheless, I've been paying a lot more attention to what's been going on in Britain recently, and I think we can safely say that the government, absolutely detestable Tory government, is, in my opinion, the worst government in the history of this country. And there's a chronic lack of trust, and a lot of people see the regime itself as being completely illegitimate. It's as if we're just run by gangsters at the moment. And of course, you've had an endless swathe of regulation. You've got an endless, like, it's just like one hate speech law, one new bit of legislation to censor people, to shut people down. It's getting worse and worse. And now you've got this new thing against extremism, which for some reason comes off the back of the issues with Israel Palestine, how that spilled over onto the streets of mainly London with George Galloway, and then for whatever reason they've decided that, well, yeah, while we're at it, we're going to ban nationalist groups as well, which they see as being an attack on democracy. And of course, it's their democracy, not ours. And all of this sort of wraps itself up in a big bundle of almost like a crisis, which isn't sort of, it isn't a crisis in the sense that an earthquake is, or something like that, but it's like this slow hemorrhaging of like belief in the system. That's what's happening across the board in Britain. I also think it's happening on the left. If you look at the issues with Labour Party and how which side they've taken on the Israeli Palestine situation, they're completely at odds with their base. So all what's happening is a sort of dropout in the system, and I thought it was interesting to kind of take a step back and figure out how we got here. Like, what has gone so fundamentally wrong with this system, where it's just like a never. It's as if the government is at war with the normal people, in particular the indigenous population, of course. And I was recently browsing through, like rereading and having a look through James Burnham's The Managerial Revolution, which I bought a while ago, and I didn't get into the later chapters. I was kind of putting it off because I knew the good stuff was going to come later. And he's got the thesis is that capitalist society would be replaced by managers and technocrats and this kind of thing. If you think of like a giant corporation, the classic example is Disneyland, how you would have the capitalist pioneer, and which was Walt Disney, and then gradually, as it expands and it becomes a corporation, the corporation needs managers and technicians and bureaucrats, and basically the managerial revolution would be that this model would be replicated all across the West. So you would be run by bureaucrats and managers as if they were running a factory or something, rather than people directly representing the interests of the people. And in the chapter called The Managerial Ideologies, which I was looking at recently, there's some really interesting points, I think, and how it kind of fleshes out very well where we are. And I just wanted to have a look at this and sort of use it as a background to some thoughts on where we are in Britain and what's gone wrong from mainly the perspective of the government. And Burnham says, so this is where you can get into it, and I'll kind of revisit this in a bit. Quote, all organized societies are cemented together not merely by force and the threat of force and by established patterns of institutional behavior, but also by accepting ways of feeling and thinking and talking and looking at the world by ideologies. No one today will deny the crucial social function of ideologies, though we are always more critical about others' ideologies than about our own. Indeed, many of us like to feel ourselves free from the influence of any ideology, though we are seldom prepared to grant such enlightenment to anyone else. A society cannot hold together unless there is a fairly general acceptance on the part of most of its members, not necessarily of the same ideology, but at any rate of ideologies which develop out of similar root concepts or starting points. And so he talks then about scientific theories because you can. His next point is that ideologies are not controlled by facts, even though they may incorporate some scientific elements and are ordinarily considered scientific by those who believe in them. The primary function of ideologies, whether moral or religious or metaphysical or social, is to express human interests, needs, desires, hopes, fears, not to cover the facts. A dispute about scientific theories can always be settled sooner or later by experiment and observation. That's no longer the case, mainly because of the decaying sort of model of managerialism which corrupts everything and sways everything into a wider arc and a wider narrative. But we'll park that to one side. A dispute between rival ideologies can never be thus settled. Arguments about ideologies can and do continue as long as the interests embodied by them are felt to be of any significance. And this is where I really believe he gets to the meat in the next part. So an ideology the ideology which you live by, which is the hegemonic uh, code uh, formula of the society, has to, at least in some way, represent the interests of the people. They have to think, well, I may not agree with all of this, but by and large, it's okay. It's not too bad. And his example that he goes at some lengths is capitalism itself. As capitalism as an ideology, then you would see things like property rights. So you would hear words like contract would be an important one, and a sort of an ethics of individualism. You know, everybody can go out and strive and get ahead. Wasn't perfect, of course. It had its critics, but by and large, everybody could buy into that because the formula would benefit everybody. And in this particular instance, he's talking about sort of just before the First World War. Everybody had the chance to go out and get a living, at least in theory, of course. I mean, he does point out it always benefits those at the top most. But by and large, if you think of something like 1950s America as well, when actually managerial was really coming in, before the negative aspects of it came in, you could see, you know, the suburbia, the 2.3 kids, the washing machine, two cars, and the garage, and all the rest of it. It was easy to buy into that. It was easy. It was a successful formula. Other successful formulas are the German regime, which we can't talk about, as opposed to raw Stalinism. They had to reconfigure their formula of ideology for the war. They had to bring in more patriotism, open the churches, and this kind of thing because there was no buy-in. And what I find interesting is that in our society, of course, we can see that there's not much of a buy-in. The formula isn't working, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So he goes on and he says, however, though ideologies are not controlled by facts, they are nevertheless subject to controls. In particular, the major ideologies of a society must be able to perform two tasks. They must actually express, at least roughly, the social interests of the ruling class in question and must aid in creating a pattern of thought and feeling favourable to the maintenance of the key institutions and relations of the giving social structure. They must at the same time be so expressed as to be capable of appealing to the sentiments of the masses. An ideology embodying the interests of a given ruling class would not be of the slightest use as social cement if it openly expressed its function of keeping the ruling class in power over the rest of society. The ideology must ostensibly speak in the name of humanity, the people, the race, the future, God, destiny, and so on. Furthermore, in spite of the opinion of many present day cynics, not just any ideology is capable of appealing to the sentiments of the masses. I'm going to read that again. Furthermore, in spite of the opinion of many present day cynics, Not just any ideology is capable of appealing to the sentiments of the masses. It is more than a problem of skillful propaganda technique. A successful ideology has got to seem to the masses, in however confused a way, actually to express some of their own interests. So, if you, as we have, the ideology of the ruling class of multiculturalism, political correctness, wokeism, and all of the rest of it, it's a flop. It's a failing formula. It's a stupid formula, which, I mean, this is going on all across the West, but I'm interested in Britain primarily. You can see that the masses, the great bulk of the people, have not bought into it. They have not bought into mass immigration. They have not bought into all the weird sex stuff. They didn't buy into the rainbow dildo. They don't like it. It's offensive. It's stupid. It's a bad formula for a ruling power, as James Burnham says here, writing back in the 1940s and the 1950s. And so our managerial system has a terrible ideological formula for ruling. Just to sort of take a step back from that, I've been heavily critical of the ideology, the formula, if you like, of rule in post-war Britain, which I call bulldog nationalism. Now, I don't want to rehash all of those old arguments and whatnot again. Here, primarily, I think it hamstrings nationalist sentiment because it has a kind of ingrained universalism to it, and it is the great victory over um, sort of racism on the continent. So you will get the tropes from the left, which you say my grandfather didn't, he didn't fight on behalf of Enoch Powell type ideas. But nevertheless, I don't think it was a very good formula. I think it's crippled the British right, but I do think it worked. I do think people bought into the main concepts of it. I do think people went along with it. They liked the idea of the White Cliffs of Dover, Vera Lynn, Spitfires, and a kind of parochial England that was defended, and they came out on the other side of that. I think that was a successful ideology of the ruling class to implement. And when you get, I would say, beginning around about in the era of Tony Blair, you begin to see that they change the formula something. You get political correctness, and of course, you get mass immigration. And what they have done is add on to that and make it ever more extreme as the years have gone by, to the point where it seems now the ruling class is just waging a kind of cultural jihad on the native population of Britain, and again, like across the West. And you just think, like, as far as formulas go, this is just completely moronic and stupid because there's nothing for the great masses of people to buy into. So what that creates is a populist backlash, which we're now. But if it's been ongoing for quite a while actually. But let's just say that it peaked 2016. You got Donald Trump, you got Brexit, and so that should have been a warning sign that their formula wasn't working. But they didn't do anything. They doubled down, and then in 2017 we began to see mass censorship across the internet. So this sort of that was the road to where we are now. And it gets worse again. You know how cynical and duplicitous the Tory government has been, because in someone like Boris Johnson, he deliberately leaned in to that populist sentiment, and it was just a complete lie. It was just a complete lie. The immigration went up higher than it ever been. It was more woke stuff. It was more critical race theory. The countryside is racist. Everything's racist. The articles which just seem to spit in the face of white people and all the rest of it. So they doubled down on what was already a poor formula. And so the disconnect grew ever more. Like, just from, I mean, Burnham's very much influenced by Machiavelli. Just from a Machiavellian perspective, this is stupid rulership. This is not how you lead. These people are complete morons. They shouldn't be in power because they don't know how to wield power. What they are doing is turning Britain into a kind of authoritarian hellscape because their own worldview is dog shit and not appreciated by the great mass of people. So now we get to the stage where they've become so hysterical, so insecure about what it is that they have been doing, that they alienated the population, they lied to the population, they've tricked the population, but it's not enough. Because then they decide, well, what we have to do is change the population's thinking through nudge units, applied psychology, and a sort of autistic managerial language, which is again, which is why I wanted to sort of touch on the Burnham aspect to this, is precisely because they've got a terrible formula, but they still have a managerial mindset because all of the problems that they've created for themselves, and the just outright contempt with which they hold power in relation to the masses of people, um, it also has like a kind of managerial logic to it where they see disagreement as a problem to be solved in a way that they're tinkering with a machine. And so this is where you get your nudge units. This is where the online harms bill is coming in, where you're going to get more regulation. You've got Ofcom now waging war on the mainstream media, and then it's soon, if not already, it's coming also onto the internet, where everything is a danger. Everything is a danger to their democracy. Everything is a danger to our liberal values. But what they're really talking about is the stupid formula that they've used. This also like repulsive, dumb, offensive ideology that they forced on us, which nobody wanted. And so now, even at this late stage, they refuse to change course. They refuse to backtrack a little bit on it. They're now reaching the point where it seems like everybody in the country is just an extremist. And when they say an attack on liberal democracy, an attack on our values, they're not talking about those of the people. They're talking about their own, of course. Everybody gets this. And so what we have now is this kind of where the curtain has fallen down and you're just ruled by a tyranny. You know, you're going to get it good and hard and you're going to get it without the lube. You're just it's just this technocratic kind of authoritarianism, which is not even interested in having you buy into its value set anymore. If you don't, then they'll persecute you. If you want to kind of protest against it, you put up some stickers, then you'll go to jail for a few years. Everything now, the net is being cast out to a degree which it seems almost psychotic, to be honest. And I just think it's interesting that it all traces back to what Burnham is describing here, where there's nothing for people to buy into because the formula, the ideology of the ruling class is repulsive to everybody. It's not based in any, as they would claim, this freedom, this all this civil rights language. It's not. It's just purely from the top. It's purely cynical. It's which we've rejected. And the great irony here is that it's, let's say, the populists, the George Galloways, the anti-establishment types. They are supposed to be a threat to democracy. That's the new one. And that again is, it's just repeating itself all across the West. If you disagree with the formula and you don't think the people in power have your best interests at heart, then you are the threat to democracy. And the funny thing about that is that when the Tory government came to power 14 years ago, I actually believed in democracy. But it is under this current conservative government that I've been just completely, my faith in democracy under this government has been absolutely shattered. But what I've learned from it is that you just don't take any of the bullshit seriously and see just a power structure. You just see people in power. And when you should have your friends where they are, that they mean nothing. And there's hard, like your vote doesn't matter because once these people are in power, they'll just do whatever they want. You vote to have immigration reduced, it'll be quadrupled. You vote for more freedom of speech, you'll get more online censorship and hate speech regulation. And the way, even, I mean, they've created a society which even you could argue justifies that in the first place. There's no way, and none of it was voted for. So the idea that anybody who isn't a politician is a threat to democracy is just a big joke. Nobody's broken my faith in democracy as the current government. And even as they now head out, even as they face complete destruction, they're talking about banning what they have defined as extremist groups, which tells me that what the Tories are really doing is salting the earth so that it becomes very, very difficult for a better right wing party to replace them when they're in the wilderness. But the key takeaway from all of this is that the illusion of liberal democracy has been broken, and it's by the people who claim to be defending it. The ideology of our own managerial class is no longer a formula to be bought into or believed that it's somehow you're going to be represented by it. It's something to be endured, like an ingrown toenail or toothache. And so we end up in a situation which is just a gayer version of the Soviet Union. But that collapsed, and the hysteria which you see in the British government at the moment suggests not all is well there either. Otherwise, they wouldn't be reacting like this, because if everybody bought into it, they wouldn't have to. Take care out there, folks, and I'll catch you later.